Okay, so you want to get into the business of wildlife trafficking. Picture the numbers first. This is an industry worth an estimated 10 to 20 billion dollars a year. That puts it right up there with drug trafficking and arms dealing in scale. You picture a single horn, a handful of scales, or one caged reptile turning into tens of thousands of dollars in cash. No factory, no permits, no taxes, just raw supply meeting desperate demand. Here's the problem. It is not simple. The paradox sitting at the center of this business is brutal. The product becomes more valuable specifically because it is disappearing. And the very scarcity that makes it profitable is the same scarcity that eventually shuts the whole enterprise down, along with almost everyone running it. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how much a pound of rhino horn sells for on the black market. You will know why the person who actually does the killing keeps almost none of the money. And you will know what happened to 5 real traffickers who thought they had found a permanent loophole in nature itself. Spoiler, none of them actually found one. Not for very long at all. Before we get into the ledgers, it helps to understand why this specific business exists at all. Wildlife trafficking is routinely ranked as one of the largest illegal trades on the planet, alongside narcotics, arms, and counterfeit goods. Thousands of species are affected every year, from elephants and rhinos down to tiny songbirds and orchids. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, a treaty signed by more than 180 countries, was supposed to shut this market down decades ago. It has not. Demand simply moved into the shadows, and the shadows turned out to be extremely profitable. 3 forces keep this business alive, no matter how many treaties get signed. Traditional medicine markets that prize rhino horn, pangolin scales, and tiger bone for supposed healing properties with no clinical backing whatsoever. Status buyers who want an exotic pelt, a carved tusk, or a rare reptile purely as a display of wealth. And exotic pet collectors willing to pay a premium for an animal that is, by definition, illegal to own. Every single case in this video is a variation on those same 3 buyers. The scale of what that demand produces is genuinely hard to picture. Roughly 20 to 30,000 African elephants are killed for their tusks every single year. Global rhino populations have collapsed by more than 90% since 1970, almost entirely because of horn poaching. Pangolins have earned a grim title as the most trafficked mammal on the planet, with more than 1 million estimated to have been illegally traded between 2000 and 2016 alone. Every one of those numbers represents a single animal, a single bullet or snare, and a single $200 payment to whoever pulled the trigger. None of those animals will ever see a courtroom. Only the humans do, eventually, and usually only a small fraction of them. Let's start with the entry cost, because on paper it looks almost embarrassingly low. You do not need a factory, a warehouse, or a single employee on payroll. In the poorest range countries, a local hunter can be equipped with a rifle, a knife, and a motorbike for a few $100s. That is the entire capital expenditure required to kill an elephant or a rhino. This is the first trap of the business, because that hunter is almost never the person getting rich. He is a day laborer paid a flat fee, sometimes as little as $200, for a rhino horn that will be worth $25,000 a pound by the time it reaches a buyer in Asia. The real entry cost is not the rifle. It is the network sitting above the rifle. A middleman with cash on hand. A corrupt customs contact willing to look the other way for a bribe. A shipping route that has already been tested and paid for. Building that network costs real money, usually tens of thousands of dollars up front. It is the one expense that separates a poacher from an actual trafficker. Because once you have that network, the product essentially launders itself through a chain of hands. Each hand adds a markup, until the original $200 horn has been marked up more than 100 times over. That markup chain is the entire business model, and it only works as long as every single link stays quiet. It rarely does, forever, no matter how careful. Everyone involved believes themselves to be. Now let's talk about the revenue mechanics, because this is where the math gets genuinely interesting. A kilogram of raw ivory might fetch a poacher the local currency equivalent of $60 or $70. By the time that same kilogram is carved, certified with forged paperwork, and sold at an antique auction in Los Angeles or Hong Kong, it can be worth $10,000 or more. Rhino horn is worse, or better, depending on which side of the transaction you are standing on. Prices have been documented as high as $25,000 a pound. That makes it, gram for gram, more expensive than gold, cocaine, or platinum. Pangolin scales follow the same curve. A few dollars a kilogram at the point of capture. Prices in the hundreds once they reach traditional medicine markets in China and Vietnam. None of this value is created by labor in any normal economic sense. It is created entirely by scarcity, by superstition about medicinal properties that has no scientific backing, and by status signaling among wealthy buyers who want something rare on their shelf. And because the entire supply chain is illegal at every single step, from poaching to transport to sale, each layer of the chain has to be paid a premium simply for the risk of getting caught. That is why the poacher gets $200 and the final seller gets $25,000. Everyone in between is charging you for the specific chance that they go to prison. This is also exactly why the business collapses so often. A chain that only holds together through fear and bribery has a structural weak point at every single link. One informant, one broken customs officer, one undercover buyer, and the entire multi-year operation can unravel inside of a single afternoon. Which brings us to the part of this video where the theory stops and the real ledgers begin. The first case starts in Orange County, California, with a father and son team named Vin Chong Ka and Felix Ka. Between roughly 2009 and 2011, the Kas built a smuggling pipeline that moved rhino-horn out of South Africa and into buyers across the United States and Asia. Federal prosecutors described the operation as generating millions of dollars in profit. Their business helped push the black market price of rhino-horn toward that staggering $25,000 per pound figure. At the peak of their activity in 2011, 448 wild rhinos were slaughtered for their horns in South Africa alone. The Kas were eventually swept up in a nationwide sting called Operation Crash. It was a joint investigation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Homeland Security Investigations, and the IRS. In 2014, Felix Ka was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison. His father, Vin, received 42 months. The charges included smuggling, wildlife trafficking, money laundering, and tax evasion. Their family company was separately fined $100,000 and placed on 5 years of probation. Together, father and son were also ordered to pay $800,000 in restitution. That restitution was funded directly from the cash and gold federal agents had seized from them at arrest. Zoom out from just the costs, and Operation Crash as a whole eventually resulted in more than 38 convictions. Over $2.1 million in fines. $5.6 million in court-ordered restitution. A combined total of 438 months of federal prison time handed out across the network. Run the math on Felix Ka's 46 months alone. A business that supposedly generated millions of dollars in profit converted into just under 4 years of his life spent behind bars. Add a restitution bill that, split between father and son, likely erased whatever personal profit either man had actually managed to keep. The second case belongs to a Malaysian trafficker named Anson Wong, known internationally as the Lizard King. Investigators once described him as the Pablo Escobar of animal trafficking. Starting in the 1980s, Wong built one of the largest wildlife smuggling networks ever uncovered. He used a legitimate reptile export business in Penang as cover. Behind that cover, he moved snow leopard pelts, panda skins, rhino horn, rare birds, and Komodo dragons to buyers around the world. In 1998, a 5-year undercover investigation by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service lured Wong to Mexico. He was arrested there and eventually extradited after a 2-year legal battle. In June of 2001, a California court sentenced Wong to 71 months in federal prison. He was also fined $60,000 and banned from exporting to the United States for 3 years after his release. He kept operating anyway. He continued shipping wildlife to American buyers through new shell companies, even while incarcerated. In 2010, his luggage broke open at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Inside were 95 baby boa constrictors, 2 rhinoceros vipers, and a South American turtle. A Malaysian court initially sentenced him to 5 years in prison. On appeal, That sentence was cut down to just 17 months. Conservation groups publicly criticized the fine of 190,000 ringgit, worth roughly $61,000, calling it a slap on the wrist. This was for a network that had spent 3 decades moving contraband worth tens of millions of dollars. The broader wildlife trafficking industry he operated within has been independently estimated at $10 to $20 billion a year in total global value. That makes his combined lifetime penalties, roughly 7 years actually served in total, and a little over $120,000 in fines, look less like a cost of doing business and more like a rounding error. And yet the rounding error still cost him his legal export licenses, his private zoo, and his standing as anything other than a permanently watched man. The third case takes us to Mombasa, Kenya, and a businessman named Feisal Mohamed Ali. In June of 2014, police raided a warehouse belonging to a company called Fuji Motors. Inside, they discovered 2,152 kilograms of elephant ivory. It was valued at roughly $433,000 and represented the deaths of at least 120 elephants. Feisal fled the country before he could be arrested. This triggered an Interpol red notice that placed him among the 9 most wanted suspects linked to environmental crime worldwide. He was finally captured in Tanzania 2 days before Christmas of 2014. He was extradited back to Kenya to face trial. In July of 2016, after 19 months of proceedings, a Mombasa magistrate convicted Feisal. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison alongside a fine of 20 million Kenyan shillings. Kenyan officials and international conservation groups celebrated it as the first successful prosecution of a genuine ivory trafficking kingpin in the country's history. For 2 years, that 20-year sentence stood as a landmark. It was proof that the chain from poacher to trafficker to prison cell could actually be closed. Then in August of 2018, a Mombasa High Court judge overturned the conviction entirely on appeal. The judge ruled that the evidence used against Feisal was riddled with gaps and inconsistencies and released him. Investigative reporting later suggested that the original police search itself may have been compromised. The lead investigating officer was accused of using his position for extortion rather than lawful enforcement. So the invoice on this particular case never actually got collected. 2,152 kilograms of ivory were seized. 120 elephants had already died for nothing. And the man identified in open court as the kingpin walked free, which is its own kind of lesson about how fragile these prosecutions really are. The fourth case moves the ledger to China and a pangolin-scale trafficking network run by 2 men identified in court records by their family names, Yao and Wang. Beginning around 2018, the pair sourced pangolin scales smuggled in from Nigeria. They resold the scales across Chinese markets that prized them for use in traditional medicine. There is no scientific evidence that pangolin scales carry any medicinal value at all. Police in Wenzhou caught the network in October of 2019. They intercepted a single shipment containing just under 11 metric tons of scales. That single seizure led investigators to a wider haul of roughly 23 metric tons overall. The total was worth an estimated 17.6 million US dollars at street value. In total, 17 people connected to the network were convicted. Yao received the harshest sentence, 14 years in prison and a fine of 4 million yuan, worth roughly $618,000. Wang received 13 years and a fine of 3 million yuan. The remaining 15 defendants received sentences ranging from 15 months up to 12 years. Do the arithmetic on Yao's outcome specifically. 14 years of his life, plus a $618,000 fine, against a network whose total product was valued at $17.6 million, split across an entire chain of buyers, sellers, and couriers. Yao's personal share of that headline number was almost certainly a small fraction of it. His personal cost was the entirety of his own life sentence. The fifth and final case belongs to Dawie Groenewald, a South African hunting safari operator. Police eventually described his prosecution as the largest rhino-horn trafficking investigation in the world. Groenewald and his co-accused were first charged in 2010 with more than 1,700 offenses. The charges included racketeering, money laundering, illegal hunting, and the unlawful dehorning of rhinoceroses. Prosecutors also accused him of selling American hunting clients falsified permits for illegal rhino hunts. The case dragged through South African courts for 15 years, delayed repeatedly by legal challenges. By the time it finally concluded, 10 of the state's original 185 witnesses had died. Others had emigrated, taking key testimony with them. In 2026, after a decade and a half of litigation, Groenewald accepted a plea deal. He was fined 2 million South African rand, worth roughly 122,860 US dollars. No prison sentence was attached to the final plea. Set that number, $122,860 against 1,700 original charges spanning 15 years. This was an operation police called the largest of its kind ever investigated. You start to see the real risk calculation traffickers make. The fine, when it finally arrives, is frequently a tax on getting caught rather than a genuine reflection of the money that moved through the enterprise. So let's build the actual invoice, because this is where the romance of easy money runs directly into the accounting. Start with Felix Ka, millions of dollars in claimed profit, an operation lasting roughly 2 years, a sentence of 46 months. Even before subtracting a single dollar of restitution, his effective hourly return on 46 months of prison time works out to pennies once you divide whatever he personally kept by every single hour he spent confined. Add in his share of the $800,000 family restitution bill, and the math gets worse, not better. Move to Anson Wong. 71 months served in the United States alone, plus a shorter Malaysian sentence later, against $60,000 and then $120,000 more in total fines. That is a bill so small relative to a multi-decade operation that it barely registers as a cost at all. Right up until you remember that it also cost him his legal business licenses and his standing as anything other than a permanently monitored man. Consider Feisal Mohamed Ali. 20 years handed down, then erased entirely on appeal. That sounds like a win until you count the 2 years he actually spent in custody before the reversal. 2 years of his life for a case that produced no lasting conviction at all. Look at Yao in China. 14 years in prison plus a $618,000 fine. His personal proceeds were almost certainly a small slice of a $17.6 million network total. His real wage, calculated across every hour of a 14-year sentence, likely comes out to just a few cents an hour once his actual cut is divided by his actual time. And finally, Groenewald. 15 years of litigation, 1,700 charges, and a plea deal that landed at just over $122,000. A number so much smaller than the scale of the alleged operation that it functions less like a penalty and more like a symbolic gesture. Now add the line items that never appear in any of these official numbers. Legal fees that across a 15-year prosecution like Groenewald's likely exceeded whatever fine was eventually imposed. Years spent as a fugitive, like Feisal's 6 months on the run before his arrest in Tanzania. Time that produced no income and constant exposure to capture. The reputational cost of a revoked export license, like Wong's, which converts a once legitimate business into something no bank or shipping company will touch again. And the invisible cost that never shows up on a court docket at all. The constant underlying risk that any single link in the chain, one informant, one undercover buyer, one broken customs officer, collapses the entire operation in a single afternoon. That is exactly what happened to the Kas, to Yao and Wong, and very nearly to Wong himself. Add all of that together, the actual prison years, the fines that rarely match the alleged profits, the legal bills, the fugitive years, the ruined licenses, and the permanent risk of collapse. The picture that emerges is not one of criminals getting away with easy money. It is a picture of an industry that pays its lowest-level workers, the actual poachers, only a few $100s for killing an endangered animal. Meanwhile, the traffickers one level up gamble years of their own lives against fines that, even at their largest, rarely come close to matching the damage done. None of the 5 men in this video walked away wealthy in any sense that survived contact with a courtroom. Some lost their businesses. Some lost years they will never get back. One lost his conviction entirely and still lost 2 years he cannot recover. The species they were trading in do not get a similar reversal. A dead rhino does not get its horn back when a sentence is overturned on appeal. That asymmetry, an animal's loss, is permanent while a trafficker's penalty is negotiable, is the actual business model, whether anyone running it wants to admit it or not. Every treaty, every task force, every sting operation like Operation Crash exists specifically to try to close that gap. So far, the gap keeps reopening somewhere else, usually in whatever country has the weakest customs enforcement that year. The frame never held a fortune. It held a receipt, written in years instead of dollars. And by the time most of these men finally read it, the animals they had already killed were already gone.